Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is another video today. It's my birthday and I've been cranking out the content because so much is happening. And actually this is a really important one because military aid today is a huge subject. You can see all the tabs across the top. There's so much to talk about, my goodness. Okay, where to start? Well, I'm going to start by saying I've just had some lovely vegan scones and jam and vegan sort of creme fraiche instead of clotted cream. That my partner bought off Tinternet, and I ate them for the first time in my life. This is very much for the British audience out there, in the Cornish way, which is putting the jam on first and then the cream on top. I always do it the Devon way, but because the cream was a bit more sloppy, that one on top, lovely cup of tea and cream tea, lovely cream tea, double chef's kiss. But I did do it the Cornish way, and it was, the box was from Cornwall, so I had to really. But I do prefer to do it, clotted cream first, jam on top, the Devon way. Anyway, for those of you who are not bothered about the intricacies of a very British delicacy, let's get started with the military aid. And we're going to start with huge news. The White House officially announced that President Biden instructed the US Department of Defense to allocate all remaining funds from the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative before the end of his term. The amount of $5.5 billion in presidential drawdown authority to ensure this authority does not expire, so it's going to run out on 30th September, as I reported last night, and $2.4 billion in security assistance through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which will provide Ukraine with additional air defense, unmanned aerial systems, and air-to-ground munitions, as well as strengthen Ukraine's defense industrial base and support its maintenance and sustainment requirements. Okay, so a bunch of stuff from American stockpiles over to Ukraine. A bunch of stuff ordered from American industry sent to Ukraine, and I presume some of that money from the USAI also investing in Ukrainian defense infrastructure in terms of manufacturing. So there you go, massive stuff there. That's not where I wanted to go to next. So anyway, Colby Badwar says PDA 66 as well is being announced, which is worth $375 million. And that's been announced by the DoD. So there are two elements of that, 5.5 billion in PDA and 2.4 in USAI. But that left an amount of money to add up to the full total of the PDA that was left. And that's because there's actually this one that was in the pipeline. Includes JSOWs, Joint Standoff warheads. Those are these guided glide bombs, the weapons, the usual list of ammunition, additional M1117 Guardian armored security vehicles. So pretty old school pieces of kit there. I don't know. Yeah, that's what they look like. So these ones, at least 150 M1117s are included in this drawdown. The first 250 pledged were via the EDA, so Excess Defense. I forget what the A stands for, MS head there, brain program, but had to be refurbished first. Is it articles? These are presumably coming straight out of stocks, so long as they were ready, condition code A or B. Amazing what the DoD can do when they aren't being intransigent. So good news, those are going to be useful, even though they're not the newest of bits of kit, I would have thought. MRAPs, light tactical vehicles, armoured bridging systems, patrol boats. 5.55 billion in PDA now remains and is expected to be notified tomorrow. So actually that was what, this is what he announced before the latest big old announcement. Just to go through this, usual stuff, tow missiles for the Bradley, HIMARS ammunition, Javelin, ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles, as well as other anti-tank platforms and munitions, mine-resistant and British protection vehicles, MRAPs, light vehicles, armoured bridging systems, small arms, patrol boats, demolitions equipment, spare parts, etc., all of those things, and those armoured security vehicles, and of course artillery ammunition to be added onto that as well. Really good stuff there, and hopefully they'll be able to get that fairly quickly. So this is the one I was expecting to talk to you about. This is Colby Badwar talking in more detail about the big old package here. So yeah, you got the 5.5 billion plus in PDA, 2.5 in USAI, 2.4 billion in USAI. And here are some news, though, he says. So the Department of Defense will refurbish and provide an additional Patriot battery. So this is really important. This is welcome, but begs the question why this could not have been done sooner. Good question. Well asked. The US Army does have Patriot assets in deep storage, but refurbishment of radar sets and engagement control stations was always going to be the challenge here. It is unlikely that anything magically changed to suddenly make this feasible, so that would suggest that this has not been done until now for political reasons. I wonder whether it's just like it can't be explained by, oh my god, we got to suddenly spend this. Okay, let's just whack it on that type. Thinking they can't really have just left it 4 days, 5-6 days before the end of the time period and just panicked and spanked it all at once. But maybe they can, I don't know. 18 additional Ukrainian fighter pilots will begin F-16 training in the US next year. Again, Ukraine has been asking for this for months. Why are they waiting? Promising this next year is rather empty with the outcome of the election unknown. A leader-level meeting of the UDCG, which usually meets, is that the contact group? Yeah, Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which usually meets at the defense ministerial and defense chiefs level. So I think Biden is convening a Ramstein meeting in October. So this is interesting, right? There does seem to be a little bit of a ramping up going on. I mean, obviously, with $8 billion suddenly being thrown on the table here in terms of equipment, of course, we know that how you understand that funding, it's very different from just a bunch of money being thrown on the table, of course, right? I've talked about that ad infinitum, ad nauseum. But there is this definite sense of ramping up. I get Biden's convening a Ramstein meeting, then it could be taking into account the victory plan from Ukraine, getting all the people together and really sorting out a very tangible assistance schedule, if you like, for all the allies so that Ukraine can fulfill its obligations in terms of what it's planning to do with that equipment towards victory. All remaining USAI funds, so that's being able to order stuff from US, and I guess some of that money is going to Ukrainian industry. But anyway, that's what you can order from US industry. It will be allocated by the end of the year, so they don't have to do that by September the 30th. Drawdown and replacement funds will be fully utilised by the end of President Biden's term. So that means that although they've said that package of $5.55 billion has been announced, it's been pledged, I presume they've worked out a way that will be spent by the end of the year, essentially. It's incredibly unlikely that the DoD will manage to obligate all of these funds by that time, so I take this as meaning that Congress will receive the reprogramming notices of the admin's intent to commit the funds. The pace of contracting has remained glacial, severely impacting the speed at which Ukraine receives pledged defense articles. The DoD needs to answer a lot of questions on the details of what their intentions are in these final months. But, I think that is brilliant, is exactly what we're wanting, which is like, come on, just spend the money, get it to Ukraine. So good stuff. Okay, I just wanted to throw this comment in here. This is the kind of comment I really like to read because it means that actually what I say has some utility. Happy belated JP birthday celebrations today. Tonight I'm going to watch Lee in the cinema with my partner. We're going to have a meal and go to cinema. And that's on the World War II photojournalist Lee Miller, filmed by Kate Winslet. So anyway, that's the fun. We're going to have a beautifully romantic time watching the horrors of Dachau. And since I started watching your videos daily, I was one of those Americans who believed we are sending loads of cash to Ukraine. So this idea that $61 billion appropriations bill is $61 billion of cash taken out from a bank in the US and taken in suitcases to Zelensky. And of course, it's not. It's mainly spending within the US, and often it's not spending really at all. You're giving a book value for equipment and then sending that old obsolete equipment to that's sitting in stockpiles and warehouses and send that to Ukraine. You can replace that if you need to, but you don't always need to. Like, do you need to replace those Bradleys? They already are on these kind of replacement schedules anyway, and all you're doing is expediting getting rid of some of this stuff. Now, with some of this kit, you had to pay to decommission it. Other stuff you could sell or having deals or give to other nations depending on what the needs are. So there is maybe an opportunity cost of not being able to sell some of this kit, but otherwise it is often kit that you are giving to Ukraine without much cost attached to it, relatively speaking. Then there are things like HIMARS rockets that are going to be taken from stocks and kind of used, but what happens then is you often get the newer iteration of any of this kit is what you order to replace it, and so the money is being spent to upgrade your own military, order from your own industry, money goes in there, tax dollars gets extracted, people have jobs, money multiplier, etc., etc., right? And actually from the $61 billion appropriations bill, only about 20 to 25 billion of that was for military aid, and it's understanding this. So the important point here is that your man here, and thanks for this, Fluxcore, he says, I didn't understand this. I believe we were just giving cash. I realise now I've been wrong about this war up until I found your videos. I appreciate you explaining or pointing us in the right direction because you are right. Our politicians don't give any explanation at all, and it's used as a political tool on a certain side. Cheers, man. Thanks again for changing my opinion on this war. I realise now how bad Russian propaganda is in my own country. Hallelujah. And I'm not a religious man, but my goodness. Amen, brother. The key, well, okay, all of those points are key. The frustration for me, and this is Biden administration, like one of my biggest criticisms about the Biden administration is their complete lack of ability to communicate these ideas to the general public. That should be front and center. Like, you don't want to obfuscate, especially when it's all kind of misunderstood. As mentioned here, it gets used as a political tool on a certain side. So the Republicans, or certain Republicans, will be using this by saying, and lying about it as well, and misrepresenting what this money is and where it comes from. And it's like, this is money that would otherwise have been spent on hospitals. Absolute bollocks. So that someone has realised that from watching these videos is absolutely brilliant. Spread the word. Disabuse people of false understandings of what's going on. Right, the US has announced, says Null report, $7.9 billion in defence assistance to Ukraine, as reported by Zelensky. So Zelensky himself has confirmed this. He expressed gratitude for crucial support, which includes an additional Patriot air defence battery, other air defence systems, interceptors, drones, long-range missiles, air-to-ground munitions, and funds to strengthen Ukraine's defence industrial base. He says Zelensky also announced the decisions to expand programs for training more of the Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16s, as well as strong sanctions. So there are sanctions involved in this as well. So I'm reading over here. New sanctions target Russia's defense industry and cryptocurrency networks. Strong sanctions imposed to further limit Russia's ability to finance its aggression against Ukraine. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so moving on. Now, senior Pentagon officials have proposed providing the armed forces of Ukraine with white phosphorus munitions for use on the battlefield, but the White House has rejected the initiative several times, three knowledgeable sources told NBC. So these are those pretty horrific incendiary munitions that are used by both sides, and they're legally used. Most of them, there are certain ones that aren't, I think, but generally they're legal. But if they're used on civilian places, then that's not legal. So if they're used just on military targets, then it's kind of fine and dandy, as horrible as they are. But like I've said before, I think we draw false distinctions with regard to weapons. It's like something like this is horrible because you can just imagine having all that, not being able to escape from all this heated stuff falling down. It sounds horrific, but it is no more or less horrific than having your body ripped apart by a mortar bomb, right? It's just different ways of dying. And this is kind of one of my arguments about chemical warfare, that this arguably, as horrible and horrific as chemical warfare is, arguably a false distinction. Like, is it worse to have your skin burnt but still be alive, or to die because you've got a sniper bullet through the brain? Like, what would you prefer? I don't know, a difficult one. Depends how your life would be with burnt skin, but it could be that actually that's a better option. And yet that is kind of illegal in war terms, and a sniper through the brain is absolutely fine. So these are complex moral discussions, but I don't think, as with all kind of moral discussions, they are as clear cut as people intuitively believe. Like straight away we think, oh, chemical warfare is terrible, and it's terrible, right? I'm not defending chemical warfare. What I am saying is that sometimes we make false distinctions or problematic distinctions which we think are grounded in some kind of objective reality, but actually what we do is we construct these different categories that are potentially a lot more fuzzy, a lot fuzzier than we think. Okay, anyway, that's a rabbit hole to go down another day. He said halfway down a rabbit hole. They said the munitions were to be used for lighting and smoke screens, not for use against enemy troops. The Defence Department has recommended that phosphorus shells be included in several aid packages, including the latest one. But they're shying away from that. Obviously, the optics are looking pretty bad, would look pretty bad on that. Andrew Perpetua's absolutely incandescent with rage, you could say, to pun intended, that the US hasn't provided enough smoke, or any allies really, smoke rounds, artillery smoke rounds, as he thinks they would have been really useful. They have had some, they have used them, the Ukrainians, but they just need more of everything. Okay, Biden administration is considering giving Ukraine the green light to strike deep into Russia, says the New York Times, provided that Ukraine uses weapons not made in the US, but British or French, such as Storm Shadow and Scalp. I've talked about that rumour. No confirmation yet. Quote, we will discuss a number of issues and we will listen carefully to what President Zelensky has to say. This will happen in the next few days, says British Prime Minister Keir Starmer about the use of long-range missiles to strike Russia. So that could be on the cards. But of course, the problem is they just don't have enough Storm Shadows or Scalp EGs. We're not producing them. And actually, let's talk to this problem. So John Healey, the Defence Secretary, so Labour government has taken over very recently, suggested that Ukraine was also running out of troops to send to the West for training. He told a fringe event at the Labour conference earlier this week that the, quote, biggest constraint in training Ukrainians was, quote, Ukraine providing the personnel in order to be trained. We'd happily train more, but it doesn't seem that there are enough at the moment. So there are claims from the Ukrainians that they've tripled their mobilisation, but there are also other data points that suggest actually they're struggling to get the numbers to get trained that they need, given a massively attritional war. Now, a report by the National Audit Office this month found that, and this is a massive problem. It's a problem strategically for the UK. It could be a reflection on the lack of money that the UK had under the past government. There are claims that now there's a £22 billion black hole in the UK Treasury in our budgeting, and obviously things are being pointed at 14 years of Conservative rule. I don't want to get down the partisan thing with UK politics here, only just trying to tell people from outside the country like what is going on. But there is a big issue here. So, okay, the claim here is a report by the National Audit Office this month found that British military stockpiles were so threadbare that the government was forced to slash donations to Ukraine in the middle of last year. The MOD, so in the middle of 2023, the MOD sharply reduced transfers of military equipment to Kyiv after concluding further donations of lethal aid would pose, quote, unacceptable risks to the UK's military readiness. So here we have an issue where the UK is one of the biggest spenders in the world on defence, right? Not nearly as much as the US, obviously, but with all other nations, we are one of the big players. And yet we've got dwindling personnel in all the armed forces. We've just mothballed 2 assault ships because we don't have Marines to fill them. You've had 14 years of Conservative rule, and our cupboards are bare. And they gave a bunch of stuff to Ukraine and then had to stop giving so much stuff because we had nothing left. But the criticism is that, okay, fair enough, so we didn't have a lot left. What have you done to build up the military industrial base to be able to increase capacity and restock those cupboards? So the criticism is that we are spending an absolute freaking ton of money on defence every year, and we seem to be very bad at procuring stuff. Like I was speaking to my dad this morning. They came round to wish me happy birthday, and as much as he can understand these days, too much information overloads him. But I was trying to explain that, stop having a go at Keir Starmer because you're just looking to, I know what you like, Dad, you just want to have a go, but how about, money, budgeting, where's that money come from, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, look, you were in the Navy, you should understand that our armed forces are chronically underfunded. Like, whose fault is that? Is that Keir Starmer's fault? No. Okay, so we need to look at what has been going on, and we need to put a stop to that, and we need to properly fund our defence. And this is someone that wouldn't have said this 10 years ago, right? So, but we're in a different place now where we need an insurance policy that is fit for purpose to cover ourselves in the case of war. We need to be ramping up production to meet the needs of this country, and the needs of this country extend to Ukraine and global conflicts, etc., etc. What have we done? When we seem, and I was saying to my dad, we are so bad at procuring stuff. HS2, big railway network, the high-speed railway thing. How much over budget is that? Like, these big things, other countries seem to be much better at. And my dad was like, yeah, I've just read about how we spent £350 million on a tunnel that's a fraction of the size of a Norwegian tunnel that cost a fraction of the amount. And that's not even building it. That was just in the planning stage. Why are we so bad in the UK at spending big amounts of money on these big projects? But one of these big projects is ramping up our production of military equipment so that our armed forces are fit for purpose, and then obviously personnel issues. Now, having said that, and this is going to sound like me trying to big up the Labour government because they're more politically aligned with my political position. Could be. But the rhetoric from Labour coming in has been good. Straight away, John Healey went to Odessa, and literally they got voted in, and then Sunday he was in Odessa. You had Keir Starmer having the NATO conference, and then a defence summit in the UK with European partners. All the right things were being said, and they said, and we're going to expedite equipment to Ukraine that has been languishing, that have been promised by the previous government but hasn't got there yet. We're going to make sure that gets there quicker, and we're going to give more stuff. But the problem is, how do we get money to give more stuff? Here we can't even, at the moment, there's so many issues with cutting winter fuel allowance. You're talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul, and we can't even rob Peter type thing. So this is why this is good news. They have at least come through on some of those promises. So the UK's new government, says Special Kherson Cat, set to surpass its pledge of delivering 12 AS-90. So we are phasing out the AS-90 self-propelled guns. We're replacing them with the RCH-155 based on the Boxer chassis that we're making in tandem with Germany. So these are self-propelled. They move on their own howitzers, right? So we're getting rid of the AS-90 from the 1990s. And we only have a few of them left. We've given quite a lot of them to Ukraine. So we're set to surpass the pledge of delivering 12 of these to Ukraine within 100 days of taking office. A total of 16 units are now on course to be delivered. So we've upped that a little bit. So that's good by, from 12 to 16. So that's another third on top of that. That's good. Another 33%, with 10 already delivered and 6 more to follow in the coming weeks. So 10 of those are already out there. That's brilliant. These have been useful. They're standard, self-propelled guns, but the Ukrainians have liked them. They've done a good job. Excellent. Getting more of those out there than was previously the case. Now, German Aid to Ukraine has a piece that since last week, Germany's approved and announced additional assistance to Ukraine totaling around 620 million euros. That's $692 million. For my latest article, I had a closer look at the announced assistance. So Germany is ramping up their assistance, even though there was talk about them, not giving as much in the next budgetary financial year, so on and so forth. So September had a few surprises up its sleeve for us all. Since last week, Germany has made a total of 620 million euros in funding available for additional assistance to Ukraine, majority of which is to be provided to Ukraine over the next 3 months. Let's take a close look. 400 million in additional military aid. So the majority of the recently approved and announced funds are allocated to the military assistance for Ukraine, which will probably cause many to breathe a sigh of release. Germany is providing Ukraine with a further 400 million euros in military aid this year. According to Spiegel, the additional money was made available because energy costs for the Bundeswehr were calculated too high. So it's a bit like the US government finding, $6 billion under the sofa, because they had evaluated the cost or price or value of some of the kit that they're given to Ukraine, and turns out that they'd done it not at the book value but some other depreciated value or whatever it was. Funds are therefore now being reallocated. So this looks like to me, and I don't really know much about this, but it looks like Germany is saying, right, we've kind of found, if you like, it's actually worth, we're not going to be spending 400 million on energy costs for the whole German army. And actually, rather than sink that into the general budget or put that into the Bundeswehr, they're putting that towards Ukraine. That shows how freaking important Ukraine is. That is a super important part of this this article, from Germany to Ukraine. According to the German government, additional air defense, tanks, drones, ammunition, and spare parts can be procured for the Ukrainian armed forces. However, I think it's unlikely that so many different kinds of material can be procured with less than €400 million, especially when you consider how expensive modern air defense and reasonable amounts of ammunition or tanks are. I think it's more likely these funds will be used to finance larger spare parts packages and other minor purchases, as various media have already reported in the past. So on and so forth. Anyway, so what else do you say? Although some of these funds have already been earmarked, they might have not yet been announced. Just to name one example, for this reason, 12 additional Panzerhaubitze 2000 self-propelled howitzers were recently announced, even though no additional funds have been available since May. So there are some things that have been announced that haven't quite been funded, so it could be that. Anyway, there's 400 million that can be used for something. Then he says 170 million in aid for the coming winter, and this is part of different aid packages. There was 100 million that was announced by Annalena Baerbock, and then also 70 million to provide Ukrainian cities and municipalities with smaller combined heat and power plants, boilers, generators, and energy systems, etc., etc. Then $50 million euros for the treatment of Ukrainian war wounded in Germany. That was something else that was announced. That's really good, and that was, as I said at the time, an investment, rather like USAI is you're going to order from American defense manufacturers, and that's kind of like an investment in your own economy. This is exactly the same. So saying, I mean, it's awesome, right? It's great. 50 million euros to help heal, rehabilitate those soldiers who have been so badly injured. But actually, it's an investment in your medical services. You're just kind of stimulating the economy, but instead of in the military industrial sector, it's in the healthcare sector. But it's still brilliant. I mean, it's exactly what Germany... yes, it is what Germany needs, which is investment in its own infrastructure. But it's also helping out the Ukrainians at the same time. And that's these kind of win-win things that I don't think people understand. Like I've said before, and your man here saying I didn't really understand how all the funding worked, etc., etc. These are ways of stimulating economy, like the New Deal back in early last century in the US. It's like, let's spend a load of money building roads and dams and whatever, but actually what we're doing, is going to be good for our economy. It's an investment in the economy going forward, but it's also giving jobs and throwing money into the economy, and money multiplies, and money is spent multiple times, and in the end you are just stimulating your own economic growth. That is what this can be seen as. So it's not just about aiding Ukraine, it's about stimulating, in this case, the German economy, so on and so forth. Anyway, that's the stuff that Germany is doing, and that's excellent. Over 30 nations in the EU are adopting a declaration in support of Ukraine's recovery. More than 30 nations and the European Union, adopted. I don't know if those 30 nations include European Union nations. Adopted a joint declaration of support for recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine during a meeting in New York. So no, it might well be 27 EU nations plus 30 more. According to the Ukrainian presidential office. That's good news there. I don't know what that will mean exactly, but they are thinking a lot about, after the war ends, reconstruction and putting things in place for that, which is really good. Now, France is stepping up its support for Ukraine with 3 financial packages, including a health component dedicated to rehabilitating the healthcare system, says French aid to Ukraine. These specific funds and loans aim to speed up the rehabilitation of the Ukrainian healthcare system, which has been severely affected by the war, by facilitating access to solutions provided by companies from the French healthcare ecosystem and with the support of French Healthcare. French Healthcare Association, a partner of the French state, as part of the public-private scheme to support exports in the healthcare sector, has once again been active in promoting these new initiatives to companies and assisting a number of companies from the French healthcare ecosystem to apply to these financial schemes. Yet again, the way this is being framed here is so much about investing in your own, exporting your own healthcare schemes or whatever, products, and so on and so forth. But anyway, I won't go on into this, but you can see that there's a very long thread there talking about how the French are looking to help the Ukrainian healthcare system. But of course, that will be, again, one of these win-win, positive sum game situations. Right, as mentioned earlier, German budget committee approved a 70 million euro winter package to support heating and electricity supply to Ukraine. The funding will provide smaller combined heat and power plants, boiler systems, generators, and solar installations. As I mentioned before, should have been with the German lot. Okay, but anyway, it's what he said in his article. Right, Tim White says Ukraine unveils another innovation here: a remote control large cars, SUVs, reaching 100 kilometers an hour, 62 miles an hour, are in use, controlled by the internet using 4G, 5G, and Starlink connections. It costs around $10,000 per vehicle. Now, risky journeys such as resupplying arms and medical kits can be safer. We heard from Robert Magyar that you will get to a situation where drones are not going to require humans to be operating them on the front lines, particularly maybe to throw them up in the air. But in terms of controlling them, AI is taking over here. Here, this isn't AI, this is remote control. But, these innovations are so incredible, really, to watch them happen before our very eyes throughout this war. There is another one there. Swedish defence manufacturer Saab is exploring the possibility of establishing production facilities in Ukraine. Add it to the list there, and we'll look at the list in a second. In an interview with Reuters, the CEO outlined Saab's intentions to support Ukraine in developing independent defence capacities. Now, what's interesting about Saab going over? What does Saab manufacture? I wonder. Oh yes, the Gripen. They obviously do an awful lot of other stuff as well. ATGMs and whatnot. But we've been hearing about Gripens being on the cards. We've heard rumours that actually pilots are flying around maybe on Gripens. There could be a bit of training going on under the radar. And we know that the last package of assistance from Sweden included forward planning for maintenance and support and spare parts for Gripens. So Gripens are happening, and Saab saying, we're going to go to Ukraine, could well be pretty important. Germany's Rheinmetall has received an order to produce hundreds of thousands of artillery mines for the armed forces of a NATO partner country, the company said in a press release. A statement noted that the value of the order is in the tens of millions of euros, and the order was placed in the third quarter of 2024, with deliveries to the order for a NATO partner country scheduled for the summer of 2025 and ending in the summer of 2026. Now, will that end up in Ukraine? Who knows? But it might have a strong chance of ending up in Ukraine, and these are exactly what Ukraine use and need. I presume these are like the ram shell type shells that fire up in the air, split into a bunch of mines, submunitions if you like, and those mines fall on the ground. And they are particularly useful because the Russians could mine clear a route from A to B, go and do stuff in B, and then on the way back to A, it turns out that cleared pathway has been remined by just dropping mines using artillery shells, and problems ensue. Anyway, talking about the Western companies getting involved in producing and repairing weapons in Ukraine, these are the ones that are listed at the moment that will or have already started. Rheinmetall, BAE Systems, Northrop Grumman from the US, BAE Systems UK, Rheinmetall German, Rochelle from Canada, Baykar, Turkey. We've got a Czech, Česká Zbrojovka, Selien Belot from Czech as well, Czechia, and Frankenberg Technologies from Estonia. So Frankenberg just announced air defense. I thought they were doing drones as well. Anyway, cartridges from the Czechs, assault rifles from the Czechs being made in Ukraine, drones from Baykar, so TB2 and possibly others. Rochelle does the Senator, the MRAP and APC and whatever other kind of variants. Ammunition from Northrop Grumman, howitzers from BAE Systems, and Rheinmetall, the German concern, tanks, APCs, air defense and ammunition. So I don't know if they'll be producing like Skynex or what air defense. I don't know. That ammunition, probably, I don't know, all sorts of ammunition could be. I mean, they have just sorted out making ammunition for the Gepards, again, those anti-aircraft guns, but I don't know if that's in Ukraine. The armoured personnel carriers are the Fuchs carrier, and then there's the Lynx APC as well. So I presume that's both of those are included in that. And then tanks, they are certainly repairing, I think, Leopards within Ukraine. So yeah, I'm sure you'll see that list increase in size. Saab, as we just heard, it has intentions of including themselves on that list. Russia has installed, now this is a bit of a worry here, Russia has installed Starlink on Shahed kamikaze drones launched on Ukraine recently, which will allow Russia to be able to communicate with Shahed throughout their 2,000-kilometer flight. So there's been talk about them using mobile phone masts and stuff like that to triangulate, and you can spoof them by changing the idea of the mobile phone mast so that it actually thinks it's somewhere and it's somewhere else, and that's why they end up going back into Russia or Belarus, right? They in reverse. They end up going off course because they're being spoofed. To get over that, if you use Starlink, then you're talking directly to the satellites, and these things can obviously fly unhindered without, I guess they'll be more resilient to any kind of electronic warfare if they can do that. Another case of US technology helping the Russians destroy Ukraine here, says Ukraine Battle Map, and some people are talking about, sanctions on Starlink and whatnot. Something definitely has to be done about the Russians being able to get hold of and utilize Starlink in a way that they do. I mean, that's an American. The problem is everyone's so afraid of approaching Elon Musk and holding into account. It's really interesting. I saw a part of a video yesterday where they're talking about the billionaire class. And it's the idea that you're getting a class of people that have so much money, like unnecessary. You don't need $100 billion of, even if it's like wealth in terms of what your company's worth and whatnot. You don't need human beings to have that much money. It's an unnecessary amount of money. And what's happening is we're getting a class of people that's almost like a sovereign elite, like you get in like the UAE or Saudi Arabia or something, that almost become like a sort of extra governmental entity, and they take on state power. So Elon Musk, for example, has is worth more than the GDP of many nations around the world, right? So here we have one single human being, and he controls he controls satellites, like thousands and thousands of satellites that our communication systems rely on. Like, as a single human being, he is, I would argue, outside of maybe the president, maybe Xi Jinping, a few others, he's the most powerful human being on Earth. And if he becomes embedded in the next American administration, he becomes truly the most powerful man on Earth. And where he can bypass statehood and sanction, this. So the analysis, or where the analysis we're going to go, is said we need to have another video on this to talk about this. But is this something we should be worrying about when you have a class of people who are effectively as powerful as state actors, acting outside of and often across borders as they control multinationals? This is a serious worry. Like, yeah, you can have a go at me for always banging on about Elon Musk and not liking him as a human being, but actually I think we, as members of whatever country you live in, should be worried about the power that is vested in or allowed to exist in single human beings. It's incredibly worrying. And here we have someone who owns technology that appears to be appeasing Russia, appears to be anti-Ukraine, and his technology as a citizen of the US. I know he's South African in origin, but his technology is allowing drones to fly across, if this is true, to fly across Ukraine and strike Ukrainian targets unhindered, arguably. Anyway, pretty important scoop, says Shashank Joshi from The Economist, saying, this is a Reuters scoop though, quote, Russia has established a weapons program in China to develop and produce long-range attack drones for use in a war against Ukraine, according to two sources from a European intelligence agency and documents reviewed by Reuters. I talked about this yesterday. Here's just a bit more meat on the bone. IEMZ Geopol, a subsidiary of Russian state-owned weapons company Almaz Ante, has developed and flight tested a new drone called the Garpia 3, G3 in China, with the help of local specialists. That's what I said yesterday, according to a report Geopol sent to the Russian Defense Ministry earlier this year. Something needs to be done about China as well and their help. I'm not going to deal with this now, but I'm going to be probably having to do a different video. Someone asked me to comment on this, about the change in Russia's nuclear doctrine. So they have apparently just changed their nuclear doctrine, the documents behind that, passed a kind of law or something. And I don't know if this means they're going to be able to more easily use nuclear weapons. And is that bit of saber rattling? Is this something to worry about, etc., etc.? But anyway, some delightful, happy subject to talk about soon. Russia, says the Kiev Independent, has found ways to circumvent sanctions and acquire restricted goods, including defense and high-tech products, writes Ana Palacio, a former Spanish foreign affairs minister. Quote, more than half of the battlefield equipment from Russia obtained between February and August of 2022 contain components made in Europe or the United States, she wrote. And actually, now we can add that, I mean, that is still continuing, but also China are aiding in that domain considerably. Right. Now, a few extra ones I've just seen as I was looking for stuff while I was recording this video. A South Korean local firm has unveiled a high-speed, long-range hydrogen fuel cell drone. This hydrogen-powered drone can fly for up to 14 hours, according to Interesting Engineering. Right, you know, I was talking the other day about dropping a drone pad or a drone pad. Like a man pad is a man-portable air defense system. The Stinger, you can fire off there. If you can get a drone, we've seen that drone take a drone dog and move it. It should be able to, a drone that size should be able to pick up some kind of maybe a tripod, like a Starstreak or something similar, where you have that man pad but set on a tripod, and drop that behind enemy lines. But like I was saying, the problem is you can't get far enough. You kind of run out of energy, run out of battery or whatever. And the day after saying all that, this is out. So the drone recently flew remotely in Germany and the US, 5,700 miles away from South Korea, 9,200 kilometers. Wow. So that technology is available. Now apply that to war. Now apply that to the Ukraine war. And both sides will be looking at going, thank you very much. This could be interesting. So watch that space. What else? This was something of note. So I hope that the batch of 30 Leclerc tanks, says French aid to Ukraine, that mysteriously disappeared from the inventory of the 2024 to 2030 military programming law will be found where they could be really useful. For realism's sake, it's inconceivable to me that an entire brigade of at least 2,100 Ukrainian troops could have been equipped with only 128 VAB, so those are French armoured personnel carriers, 18 Caesar guns and 24 AMX-10 RC. So what's he talking about? If you remember, France is training up a whole unit, a whole battalion of troops, and they're equipping them with all the mechanised equipment, which is going to include Caesar self-propelled howitzers, AMX-10 RC, so 24 of those light tanks, three wheels on each, that's six-wheeled tanks, that arguably aren't tanks, depending on how you define them, with quite a light gun, and then the 128 of these armoured personnel carriers. French aid to Ukraine is saying suddenly 30 tanks have disappeared from a list. And he said, by the way, to put this in context, something similar happened before with two LRU, these are multiple launch rocket systems that the French use, that were taken out the inventory of the military programming law and were found in Ukraine. So there's precedence for this, to suddenly have some French equipment disappear from a list where they should be, and then without announcing it, they are seen in Ukraine. Now this, and he says, it is also inconceivable to me that they will be transformed into the Leclerc evolution, as the CM has stated that Leclerc will not evolve beyond the Scorpion XLR standard. So what I think he's saying is that these tanks are unlikely to be disappearing because they're going to be upgraded into this new version of whatever. In other words, it seems likely that the French brigade, battalion, whatever, that is being put together, the Ukrainian units being put together by the French, it's likely that they're going to get 30 French Leclerc tanks. It's speculation, of course, make of that what you will, but I find that pretty interesting. And it wouldn't surprise me. The French aren't very forthcoming with what they do. They keep things a lot quieter than other more transparent nations like Germany and the US even. So yeah, interesting. We'll watch out for that. And we're going to see, of course, as I mentioned, Biden convening the Ramstein Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting in October, and that. things could be moving along. We might be getting a bit more happening in support of Ukraine. In the meantime, of course, there's all the political fallout taking place of like one side in US politics having a go at Zelensky and wanting to appease Putin, and the other side being much more strongly in support of Ukraine. Anyway, that's enough from me. There's a big one today. I told you it would be. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.